Kate Mila Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book, and we are on video number 3 of Phone Calls from the Dead. And 1 and 2 we did last week. This will probably be the last part of the book. And then I have a conversation with one of the authors, Professor Callum Cooper, all the way from England. It's incredible what telephones can do. I know what the computer can do. Okay, let's get right to it. We ended last video, starting chapter 7, called Further Elements of the Mystery. So far we've talked about these mysterious phone calls, and we've talked about the pros and cons of believing that they're actually from the dead, or are they from the person's mind, or something in between. Then they talked about the technical aspect of how they happened. Is it electromagnetic interference all the way through the telephone lines? Is it some sort of psychological or spiritual interference with the telephone instrument itself in the house? Pros and cons for that too. So let's talk about more of the mystery. The author describes this. In 1975, he was relaxing on the couch, and at 4 o'clock, he knew he needed to make a call to UCLA. And he procrastinated, as we often do. 2 hours later, still sitting on the couch, the phone rang. And UCLA said it was returning his call from 4 o'clock. But he never called. He thought about calling, but he didn't call. He investigated further. He talked to the staff members. He talked to the specific one who said they got a call from him. And this staff member left a written message. He called at 4. So this is why they began to call what's known as intention calls. He intended to call. He just didn't actually call, but the call went through anyway. This happens to me sometimes. I'll intend to call somebody, and it's not a situation where we've kind of made an agreement, or we kind of have something that we need to work on, and it would make logical sense that we would be in touch. It's usually somebody I haven't talked to in quite a while, from far away, maybe a relative, whatever, and they'll suddenly call me. Now, they don't claim they got some kind of ghostly call from me, but they'll call me and they'll say, it's funny, I've been thinking of you. It happens quite a bit. So obviously that's some sort of telepathic communication. So far, neither one of us has been dead. That's been good. Anyway, there's a lot of mysterious stuff that goes on. So they began to study these kind of calls called intention calls, where somebody wants to call and it somehow happens. They're parallel to calls from the dead, phantom calls. In the 1960s in Arizona, a writer intended to make a call to a Mr. T, probably not the TV Mr. T, at 12:30, and he got distracted until 5 o'clock, and the workday was over. So he decided I'll call tomorrow. At home, he got a message to call Mr. T. So he said to Mr. T, "Hi, I'm home and I got your message." And Mr. T says, "What message? I didn't leave a message for you. I was returning your 12:30 call to me." So that's very interesting. There was a surgeon who was woken late at night. The nurse was on the phone and said, "Come to the hospital. There's a patient in crisis." So he jumped out of bed and he got dressed and he went to the hospital and he saved the patient. And then the nurse said, "I was really lucky that you were here." And he said, "Well, you called me." And she said, "I never called you. Nobody called you. Nobody called him. They asked. Nobody called him." One theory is that psi is mediating and creating hallucinations, and people only think they get a call, but it's really a whole entire telepathic experience. The unconscious mind is picking up on signals. I hope you can't hear my dog. I apologize. My husband's feeding them. They get a little overexcited about being fed. as do we all. A woman got a mysterious phone call and told, don't take your trip that you planned to India. So she rescheduled it for later. And on the day that she had planned to arrive, there was an outbreak of smallpox right where they were going to be. Now, this could have been her picking up something telepathically and hallucinating a phone call. Unknown. Some people dream of calls. It's like they get a call in their dreams. But there are verifiable real calls that really happen. In 1975, a man in Minnesota got a call from his wife's friend Mary asking for his wife to babysit that evening. But his wife was out of town, and so Mary was really disappointed and said, okay, well, thanks, goodbye. When the wife returned later in the week, she called Mary to apologize. I'm sorry, I was gone, Mary had never called her. She just thought about calling her, but she had never called her. And there was a witness to all of this. This was not an hallucination. Mary's intention had made some kind of physical effect on the phone. These intentions are not always conscious. In World War II, a soldier in the South Pacific in Asia was knocked unconscious, and his mother in the United States got a call. And in the call, he said, "Mom, it hurts." The author says that this is connected to calls from the dead. If the dead can generate calls, then surely a living mind can generate calls. And conversely, if we can do it alive, then why not when we're dead? But phantom calls from the living are less common. The question is, shouldn't they be more common? I mean, don't we want to communicate? So it may have to do with reporting, that people are actually more likely to report unusual dead calls because they're so weird, or they may not realize that the call that they got from a living person was actually a phantom call. They may not make that connection. Are the dead more adept at it because they're dead? Determining how calls are produced may help explain the nature of the calls. And the easy explanation is you're wishing to make a call, your PK energy is projected over a distance, and remember, there's no such thing as time or space, so it just connects and it creates an electromagnetic effect on the phone because distance has no meaning. Studies have been done. Sleeping subjects far away could affect dice throws in the lab. They could be 170 miles away and they can affect dice throws. I don't know how that works. But although an appealing theory, we don't know what PK really is. It's like this explanation they made to explain something that they don't really know what it is. They're explaining psychic energy called PK, making things happen. A thing without a substance, PK, is telekinesis. Are you using your mind to influence the physical world? Is it an energy? Is it a force? What is it? Psychokinesis is just a label for something we can't explain. It's a category, really, not an explanation. There's no reliable evidence. We don't even know. Now, I don't know since the book was written. We'll have to ask. I'm trying to keep track of some good questions that the book arises for me. One theory is that PK is proof of a direct link between our minds and the universe. It's a bridge that connects and has a physical effect. In that sense, it would be related to ESP. But it may be something that occurs when, under certain circumstances still to be established, an idea or intention in the mind can automatically constrain a physical system to act in such a way as to express the idea or intention. That This is, in the last report, an ultimate fact about the world. There is no further bridging mechanism to be invoked to make this fact intelligible. And this might explain intention calls. Is it quantum physics? They've made a lot of progress in quantum physics since 1979, so that'll be an interesting question to ask. Subatomic rules are different than other rules. Some parts of an atom can flow backwards in time, for example. I'm trying to imagine how that works. What does that look like? Whoa, that atom just came from the future. Some can be in two places at once. We know that to be true. So they're so unpredictable that they're not called outcomes, they're called probabilities. And he said in 1979, there are big changes in understanding of physics at the time. The book discusses physics and Schrodinger's cat. And I really hate that story because I never fully understand what on earth it's talking about. Physics, not my strong point. Everett and Welter, two guys, made an interpretation of these phenomena and said that there are many worlds in the cosmos. This is called the parallel universe theory. So you think about calling, and there are many ways it can go, from you don't do it to you sort of do it to whatever. And it depends on which universe you're talking about. In one universe, you think and you don't call. In another universe, you think and you call. And it's actually made physically. And the dead are on another dimension, ostensibly. So explain that. In 1880, there was a theory that PK was possible if you postulate existence of other dimensions. So this anticipated quantum physics, basically. This was from a book called Transcendental Physics by Zollner, written in 1880. Can the intention of a living person be transmitted by a phone call from the dead? A proxy intention. I'm starting to get a headache. A woman who was desperate and sad, missing her best friend in a foreign country. She didn't have his new phone number. Her husband was at death's door, and she wanted to talk to her friend who was far away without the phone number. She fell asleep. At 8 o'clock in the morning, there was a loud knock on the door, and it was her friend far away at the door, like came. Last night, he said, about 10 minutes past midnight, apparently, you telephoned the police station at Norwich. You asked them to find me and gave them my old address and said you lost the new one. And they came right around to me fairly quickly and they woke me up. They said that you were in great trouble and I must come at once to you because Arthur was dying. Come because Arthur, her husband, was dying, put on clothes, caught the milk train, and to Colchester, and here I am. Mrs. Roberts just couldn't buy the story since she had not made any calls the night before, even though she thought about doing so. She wrote a book about this, and as she explains in her book, so Rogo Till is this friend of hers that came. He and my own doctor did not understand the story at all. And Rogo Till, who was a very persistent man, got hold of the telephone operator who had taken the call and asked him to come round and see him in my house. At the time, I knew nothing about this, but they told me later when I recovered and was feeling better. The operator said the message had come from my house 10 minutes past midnight. I asked for the police station. I admit I believe this to be possible, for I have the greatest faith in the police, and in any grim emergency would turn to them. They would have been the very people whom I would have called. The operator said to her friend that the woman who had spoken to him was not myself, whom he knew quite well, and he was familiar with her voice, especially because they had talked earlier. He said that it was the voice of a quite calm, but a much older woman. Someone was a stranger to him, and whom he would have believed to be middle-aged. She wasn't worried. She spoke clearly. She said she wished to speak to the headquarters of the police, and he thought that she was a bit disturbed, but not distracted. She could not muddling her words. He later got called off to other business and so didn't hear all that he said. The operator said that the voice was quite controlled and told the police that she was speaking for her daughter, whose husband was dying. The caller wanted them to get in touch with Rob Till and said that her daughter needed to deliver an urgent message to him. The police had subsequently checked into his whereabouts, contacted him, sent him to the friend's house where the husband was dying. It was a happy ending, except for one strange fact. The woman who identified herself as Mrs. Roberts' mother, who called the friend, called the police and got the police to go get the friend, talk to the friend. She'd been dead for a while. If PK hadn't done it, would she have used her own voice to call? So did her dead mother call for her? Or what was that? Then there's no answers to these. This is just these perplexing cases. So her dead mother saw she wanted help, saw her daughter suffering because her husband was dying, saw her daughter suffering because she missed her friend. And the dead mother took it upon herself to call the police station to go get the friend and tell the friend, you have to come. Okay. Precognitive messages. A young woman got a call while visiting a friend, a call from the family doctor. Her mother was being rushed to the hospital because, DV. And the doctor wanted the daughter to meet him at the office. So she rushed to the doctor's office. When she got there, he looked at her like she was crazy. He said, I don't call you. He had no idea why she was there. He didn't know anything about her mother. The next day, the incident happened. Melvin Belly, the attorney in 1960, he told the National Enquirer in 1978, so we know this is true. He got a call from the mortuary. His friend was dead, and the funeral would be the next day. He offered to be a pallbearer. It was arranged. He showed up at the funeral home the next day to be a pallbearer. There was no dead friend. His friend wasn't there. His friend wasn't dead. He called his friend. His friend was fine. The next week, his friend died unexpectedly and was taken to that funeral. So the book reiterates time and distance have no meaning. Was the call time displaced, or was it retroactive PK? What's going on here? We don't know. Studies are being done. Can a future intention affect a present event? So if something happens in the future to a friend of yours, could it be that you'd get a call from them or get a call about that happening to them today? Very strange. So they've done experiments with random number generators to answer this question, and the answer that they got is yes, the future can affect the present. Some people can affect the numbers results and even get better with it at practice the more they try. They even saw the machine being affected while it was being in calibration before the actual intentions were being put out. He discusses harassing phone calls that were received several days after a UFO sighting, kind of a close encounter, but the person hadn't told anybody. But they're getting harassing phone calls about it. They're on these phone calls, and you have to wonder about this, though. I wonder if this has anything to do, or is this intended call coming directed towards the person, has a UFO experience, doesn't tell anybody, gets harassing phone calls. The phone calls tell them to forget you saw, don't tell anybody. So the question is this from E.T.? Or is this your own PK energy? Is it an approach avoidance manifestation? You struggle with what you'd seen. Should I or should I not be telling people? And your subconsciousness is telling you, don't say anything. So this next one is what he calls the strangest case in their files. A woman saw a UFO and got a call from Roger, and Roger said, "Don't tell." She says, "I don't know a Roger." And he said, "I'm a brother. I'm your brother. I'm a family secret." She found out years later that she had a stillborn brother named Roger, who had been born before she was, and the family kept it a secret from her. So the author says, if PK is coming from us, why don't we get calls from the living about the living? We don't. I mean, not unconsciously. There are answer cases. He says you call and it's answered by the dead. So the case of Gary, who was renting a room. So Tony, okay, so this is how it goes. Tony called the author. Bob answered the phone. Nobody else was home. And he took the message. And the message was, there was a call for Gary from Tony. Later in the week, Tony asked, "Did Bob give you the message for Gary?" And everybody said, "Well, who was Bob?" Bob was a friend from San Francisco. Bob was not in his apartment. Bob wasn't home. He didn't answer any call from Tony. How about Gus, who stopped at a monastery to visit, and in the entry was a telephone, and he picked up the phone, and it was answered by a man who said he was Father Clement. And so Gus left a message for his friend the abbot. The abbot was shocked when he got this written message. Father Clement had been dead for several years. He had been in charge of the switchboard, and was his ghost running the switchboard? I mean, what happened? In checking the switchboard, they discovered that it had not been used during the time this call came in. A woman saw her neighbor's Barbara in Germany. Oh, she's not in Germany. She had a German Shepherd. So this woman has a neighbor, Barbara, who has a German Shepherd. And it was loose. It was a farm dog. And she called the neighbor, and an unfamiliar voice answered the phone. And she says to this unfamiliar voice, "The German Shepherd is loose." And the woman says, "I don't know what you're talking about. My dog is not loose. My dog is sitting at my feet, and it's not a German Shepherd." And then she hung up. Before hanging up, she said, "Tell Eliza I said hello, and ask Lavinia to drop by with jam. Drop by to pick up jam." So the woman then at this point is shocked. Eliza's been dead, and Lavinia long moved to another state. Who did she just talk to? In checking the neighbor, the original neighbor she had tried to call about the dog, the previous owner of the house, now dead, had a schnauzer, a different kind of dog, and she was very close to Eliza, and Lavinia was the dead previous owner answering the phone when the neighbor was gone. This is what appears to have been happening. Except, no. Barbara, the neighbor, who owned the German Shepherd that was loose, had been in the house the whole time. The phone never rang. What? I love this. Chapter 8, Electronic Contact with the Dead, a Wider Perspective. Does evidence support the possibility that the dead manipulate electronic equipment from days of old, the telegraph and wireless telegraphy? So, for example, there were frantic distress signals from San Francisco throughout the US that came by telegram hours before the 1906 earthquake. But people didn't send them. What was that? When you think about the possibilities of the energy from coming out from the earth and the energy disruption in the atmosphere from an earthquake, you start to wonder. Probably phone calls are only one of many technical ways that the dead can communicate. In 1915, David Wilson, a London attorney, experimented. He was an amateur psychic investigator. That's a good hobby. And a wireless operator. And a wireless puts Morse code through wireless radio waves out to where you want it to go. He got interested when a friend described messages, even when equipment was disconnected. Wilson attributed these to signals from the ether wave. This is what the ancients called it, the ether. He built a device that included a galvanometer, which registers the presence or strength of electrical currents. When the needle first started moving independently, he thought, oh, there's a vibration in the room, or the neighborhood has a wireless going and it's interfering, or maybe it's light waves, or maybe it's some unknown physical wave that we're unaware of. Eventually, the needle began making pattern responses that could not be written off by any of the speculative causes I just mentioned. It dawned on him that the signals were jerky and sporadic. Was it Morse code? It spelled out, this is what these messages were: great difficulty, await message, 5 days, 6 evenings. So he invited a witness who knew Morse code and got this message: try eliminate vibrations, ARTK. Wilson tried hooking a person up to keys like with automatic writing, only with Morse code keys. He got boring communications, and he only wrote down a couple of them because they just were boring. He wondered what the source was, if it was the dead or it was some psychic origin in the ether. He had a friend in Paris create the same kind of setup to test the ether theory. Now, he explains in great detail in the book how this machine was put together and connected and how it worked. And frankly, I didn't really understand it. I didn't try very hard. I thought it was kind of boring. I'll just take their word for it. If you really want to know the technical details, you can get the book because it's a pretty fun book. So sometimes so he asked this friend in Paris if they, to build the same thing, and they tried to connect, and his friend in Paris got some messages, but he even got messages in Russian. He's in Paris. He's a little closer to Russia. Wilson published this, and that was the only thing he ever published. Was the source of his psychic ability before World War I, mind you, before PK abilities were recognized to be widespread. Was this his psychic ability? Today, we know that many people with no obvious psychic claims can use PK to affect sensitive equipment. Apparently, it's some sort of ability we all have, and it's just how well are you able to access it. And sometimes it happens unconsciously. You don't know you're doing it. The author's question is, why did they get the message in Russian? Well, because Russia was closer, I would guess that would be. Or here's the other thing. I wonder if they thought of this. A lot of Russian immigrants in Paris. A lot of them after the revolution. Did Wilson know Russian? If not, then that argues against the source being from Wilson's mind, if he didn't speak Russian. Wilson never concluded these messages were from the dead. He assumed that they were telepathic. But why was it addressed to him specifically if it's just random telepathy? So this was called, this experiment was called the Wilson effect. In 1962, Mark Dine, a technical editor at a British electrical company, told a newspaper that he had been investigating telegraphic contact with the dead for years, very similar in the technique that Wilson had used. One message he got was, "Good luck, a new age has commenced." Many reports exist in the early years of telegraphy about communication from, they don't know where it came from, just random messages. One guy even wrote a hoax book inspired by all the reports, and this book discusses debunking this hoax book. They debunked it, and it talks about the technical parts. It was popular right after World War II, when interest in spirit communication was high. The authors think that this was probably some psychic communication going on here, but totally exaggerated and intended to deceive people. We have the example of Francis Grierson in the 1920s, an American literature figure, writer, who was a psychic medium and who designed a telephonic device for the communication with the dead. Then in 1947, there's Zwan, a guy who is Dutch, an experimenter who claimed that he got plans to build a spirit radio from mediumistic communication. He got help in English to build it and claimed he had success, but he never published his reports, and he sort of faded from the news. Also in the late 40s, GE researcher Harry Gardner, who was also a bit of a spiritualist, and J.G. Wright together developed a tool to amplify spirit voices. They called it a channel for paraphysical voices in the presence of a psychic. You had to have a psychic around for it to work. It sounded much like the work of Raymond and Zale ages ago. These two GE guys really never did much with it. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of toying around with tinkering with machinery, Rube Goldberg sort of machinery, and then doing kind of not really well-controlled experiments and then talking about them, but never doing much about them, never pursuing it. So all of these inventors, they hoped to amplify parapsychological voices so they could be heard. Some were already audible, and some they did make more audible. In 1906, Elizabeth Blake in Ohio used two cones together, and sometimes voices could be heard in the room. It was first known by a skeptic magician named David Abbott, and he wrote the classical expose of psychic frauds called Behind the Scenes with Mediums. And he did try to keep an open mind, and he investigated Blake, and he was shocked when a fellow skeptic named Clausen heard the voice of his brother Eddie. And there was no way that Blake even knew that this guy was coming. So the first skeptic, Abbott, was investigating all these psychics and mediums, and he went to where this woman Blake was with the cones, hearing voices. Without telling her that he was going to do this, he brought another friend, and the friend's brother came up and showed up in this session. Clausen did have a dead brother, Eddie, and then he asked a question, and he got identifying answers from his dead daughter. Her voice went in and out of audibility to those in the room, but it answered appropriately. No one present knew anything about Clausen except Clausen. Nobody knew about his life, not even his friend Abbott didn't know about this stuff. Kind of a random skeptic who tagged along at the last minute. He also got messages from his dead uncle. This guy's getting all kinds of information. more days that they did this, the better the results were. The skeptic tested the voices with obscure personal facts that nobody would know. The skeptics, they looked for ventriloquism and they couldn't find it. They couldn't explain the voices. The voices were recognizable as dead people that they knew in life. These are examples of voices that manifest in other than electromagnetic technology. They were just using physical cones. Voices have been heard through televisions, radios, CB, breaker, and record players, the amplifier of record players. There are examples of unidentified voices coming over gramophones above instrumental recordings on gramophone. Remember the big thing with the ear, the tulip-shaped thing? And you wind it up. I mean, they were old when I was young. I just remember them from movies. And they would have these discs that would play like a record, and they'd have a purely instrumental one. And the next thing you know, they could hear voices. Where was that coming from? The voices claimed to be demonstrating, claimed to the public listening that they were trying to demonstrate that this is a possible thing to do. Does it have something to do with manipulation of sound waves by music? Edgar Wallace, a writer who was the rival of Arthur Conan Doyle, had an old 78 RPM record cutter. And after his death, his secretary used it to create a record. She was shocked to hear Wallace's voice, and no one believed her. But she claimed she did. They've even heard of messages being left on answering machines. The book discusses details of equipment created by early researchers, including something called Malta cylinders. And their results were startling, but I wrote in parentheses, but technical and kind of boring. The author discusses the study that shows that PK was used and this is really interesting, they somehow got people that were able to use their psychic ability to raise the temperature of bakelite, which is like a pre-plastic thing, and graphite. The inventor H. Vandermuller claimed that his dead son told him how to build a machine to communicate with the dead by spelling it all out on a Ouija board. The machine was meant to signal to a person that the dead had a message, and then they'd then they would use the Ouija board to do kind of automatic writing. And there are reports that it worked well. Psychics who used it said it worked well. So he was an inventor, and he was using the Ouija board, and his dead son told him, hey, this is how you make a machine. It'll make it easier. And so he made this machine, and it helped the Ouija, it helped them to spell things out. Edison, his parents were spiritualists, and he was into psychic phenomena. He tried to invent the telephone that would specifically communicate with the dead, and he admitted this in Scientific American. But he was secretive about a lot of the stuff he did and the inventions that he made, and no one knows if he ever really finished this thing. One probable fraud blueprint surfaced decades after his death, but people don't believe it was real. The author believes that all these early attempts and reports were sadly mostly ignored until the 1960s, when Rogo, and he was very criticized when he did his stuff, but he made an impact on psychic research. Of course, people laughed at him. He at least revived interest in it, and there's been more study. And the study that was stimulated by his work was still being done when the first book was written here. The author describes the technical difficulties used, technical differences used in the 70s for their new experiments. One guy, a guy called Weinberger, even used, I'd forgotten about this, he even used Venus flytraps as psychic detectors, as receptors. He claims that he got intelligent responses. And he admitted that they could be from his own PK and not the dead. So the conclusions are that some contact was made over decades with some force. What was communicating? Was it the dead, or was it the experimenters' own minds? Most successful results happened when they were using electricity. Many of the inventions used successfully were given to the inventor through mediums or psychics. It's like the dead told them how to do it, and then the machines worked. Most worked best in the presence of proven good psychics. All instruments were used for normal communication. All instruments that are used for normal communication can be manipulated by some psychic force. It's hard to argue with some of the cases, and there's verifiable facts about dead people not known to the people present. So they're not reading their own mind and using PK. Calls from the people the receiver don't know. The receiver doesn't know, was very weird. Like, why would the dead do that? True, really good psychics are rare, and therefore these tools do help to make it easier. Like maybe the dead just give up, well, I'll just call on the phone. They're not paying attention. It seems to be a desire to communicate from the dead. It seems like they really are interested. So let's look here. All of these factors lead us to one main conclusion. A person who receives a phone call from the dead, or a telegraph signal from the next world, or a psychic voice printed on his electromagnetic tape might be witnessing the end result of an organized experiment on the part of the dead as they continually try to make contact with us. These experiments are bound to continue. So then this book has an appendix, and there's some critique of all of this. And so they admit that the authors bring their biases to their writing. They are frank about that. They were heartened by the interest they got from the professional community. They asked some of the professionals, wide variety, professors, psychologists, electronics people, they asked them to give a critique while the book was still being written. They got a lot of scientific process discussions. There was agreement that PK occurs, and that phones and tape recorders are good tools for study of this. They admit that it's too facile to dismiss something because it's weird. Even professional parapsychologists have their own orthodoxy, and they're conservative, and they're likely to dismiss extreme explanations. I thought that was really, 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 really interesting, because you would expect if your field is parapsychology, you're kind of open to weird things. Death calls have been ignored and should be studied, is the conclusion. He wrote a postscript 45 years later. This book became a bestseller, and the claims continued despite changes in technology. Both authors were in high demand every year around Halloween. They kept receiving information about cases, and all of this information is now stored at the University of Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies and the California Institute of Integral Studies and at the Lawrence S. Rockefeller Library there. There was a follow-up in Italy in the 1980s. Dr. Massimo Biondi solicited cases. He got 40. 20 were hard to explain. He was doubtful it was the dead. Douglas Scott Rogo. This I'd forgotten about this. This is terrible. So one of the authors of this book. Now, this is a new edition of an old book, and that's why there's an updated 45 years later, an updated postscript. And the man who wrote it wrote this book, which I just got. So I'm hoping to read it, but we are going to talk to him. But Douglas Scott Rogo was murdered in 1990 in Los Angeles, and was finally solved as a cold case in 2021. Dr. Bayless died in 2004, and his wife reported that she had communication with him after he died. Dr. Cooper points to calls made after death, like my grandfather's clock. I don't know if you know that song, My Grandfather's Clock Stayed Too Long on the Shelf, though it stood so many years on the floor. We sang that in school. I'll spare you the recital. So Cooper began searching for stories using cell phones, baby monitors, modern technology. He tells the story from a fellow doctor. As a child, his mother spoke on the phone to her old best friend 2 or 3 times a week for 15 minutes. But then the friend died, and in the following week, the phone rang at his usual time. She went into the other room and returned after a while, white as a sheet, and said it was him. It was the dead friend. These calls continued to come in. They did decrease and finally stopped, but they went on from 1958 to 1961. The professor later found his mother's diary full of stuff about the conversations with her dead sweetheart. Another example, a man got a call on the cell phone from the house landline with the, so from a woman who's dead, and accompanying the phone call, the room filled up with the smell of her perfume and cigarettes. His daughter got texts, but no sender ID and no date. And this is the creepy part. His wife was buried with her cell phone. Was she calling from the coffin? Oh my God. Cooper wrote a sequel, Telephone Calls from the Dead. I hope I'm going to read it. And one researcher in 2016 suggests a Jungian trickster archetype is responsible for all of this, because it's elusive and high strangeness, but obviously something objective is happening. Made me think of Jacques Vallée. The podcast Haunted did Death Is Not the End. Cooper's been on BBC shows as an expert, and he describes this the skeptic named Will was with his friends, and he was talked into being there when they played with the Ouija board, but he watched, he didn't participate. The spirit spelled out its name and said its name was Harry. And of course they asked, what do you want? And the answer was, Will. Will said, stop, this is nonsense. And he returned to his dorm. But he had more messages from Harry, who called on the hall payphone. He didn't know a Harry. One day, a student knocked on his door and said, hey, Harry's on the phone. He heard gibberish that sounded like old-fashioned, not from the 1990s. And this continued, these calls and messages. Sometimes there was no voice. It was just a distant wind. And then he began seeing an apparition in his room, after which there were no more calls. And there's more stories. A 10-year-old talking to a Fisher-Price toy phone, talking into it. And I wrote the wrong page number down. There is no page number by that number. That's not good. Well, we're not going to know what the story is because I wrote the wrong the wrong page number down. That's weird. Well, it's not all that weird because I get really tired doing these notes. Oh, well. A 10-year-old got messages from her Fisher-Price phone anyway. I do remember that. Then there was this Wendy in Austin, Texas. Her dad had been in surveillance and had lots of equipment in the house. He'd been sort of a secret agent, and he talked to her after she died. She started to get static calls from his weird phone system. He had this weird secret agent surveillance type phone system. One of her friends said, "This is impossible. Look, you're not getting anything from this. It's not wired to anything." And she held it up to show that it, it couldn't work. It's not plugged in. And while she was holding it, showing it, it rang. So he was a professor of electronics. And okay, so he saw this happen. There was a professor of electronics that saw this happen, and he was shocked. He told the static, because there's nobody there, he told it, "Go in peace," and the phone went dead. Many PhDs now get their degrees, their advanced degree in parapsychology. It's taught in a lot of universities. I wonder how hard it is to get a PhD in parapsychology. Lots of journals are out there now, science, medicine, studies, more than 1,000. They did a study with widows. There are TVs, there are podcasts, and he points out that we know more about neurological function now that is not paranormal. We wrote it off as paranormal before, but now we know that there's a neurological explanation. That there have been ways of coping with bereavement throughout history, and people used to say, "Well, it makes you a little crazy," right? He said, no, it's not psychosis, but it's really hard to explain. He says, "I'll tell you what, I'll just put you on hold as the research continues." And that was the end, January of 2025. So with luck, we might have our questions answered. Please, I'm hoping that you did put questions in the comments of the earlier videos. We're doing these back to back, and I will have already talked to him, so don't leave any questions in this video because it'll be too late. I will have already talked to him. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Sorry I couldn't read my handwriting, but that should surprise nobody at this point. And I'm hoping I will read this. I'm kind of tempted to save it for a whole different set of videos and talk to him about it before the fact. We'll see. We'll see how my budgeting of time goes. It's up to that. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hope you don't get any mysterious phone calls. Slán go foil. Slán.